Somebody asked me about cutting threads on wood, particularly a hobo handline. So I thought I'd do a demonstration of using the wood threading kit. Now this is a device for cutting threads on a piece of wood. So you get different sizes. This particular one is 1 1/4 inch, but you get everywhere from 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, the 1 1/4 that I have, and the 1 1/2 inch. And in the box you'll find there's the thread cutters. So I'll show you a few things. This obviously cuts the male thread. I'll explain how that works when I do it. And then you've got the tapping female tap, which is this, and a rod that goes through there, tightens up with a screw to help you cut. Now there are 2 of these. One is supposedly bottomless, but I find it's very difficult to cut a bottomless plug, so I tend to cut all the way through when I'm cutting a female thread, or drill all the way through, and then I can cut all the way through. There's the other one in the bag. It is open, I have used it before. This one is better for starting off because it has more of a taper in the beginning, or less cutting action in the beginning, so you can get the first part in relatively easily before you start cutting. And once you've cut with this one, you can switch to the other one to cut that last little bit of thread at the bottom of something that you're tapping. So that's what comes in the box with instructions. So I'll try and retrieve. So in the box you'll find tapping operation instructions. There's not a whole lot to it in terms of instructions. There's no diagrams, just a bit of text. So if you do have one of these and you've tried to use it and failed and given up on it, maybe this video will help you learn how to use it. So what I've done at this point is just taken a piece of scrap wood. I've rounded it off, put a spigot on it so I can grab it in my jaws and my chuck, and now I need to cut this down to size. Now the size I need to cut it down to is a little bit less than this ring here. What I found in the past is if I make it a tight fit on this radius or diameter, it's too tight, and the cutting tool will have a problem cutting that. So I'm going to cut it just a little bit sloppy in there, not completely loose, but just a little bit smaller than that. So I'll take my calipers, if I can find them, and I'll measure the inside diameter of that. So I'll loosen that off. Digital calipers are probably more accurate, almost certainly more accurate, but these will do. So that's the inside diameter, which I make at just over 32 millimeters. So if I make it 32 millimeters, that'll be about right. I wanted to show you a really good close-up of the difference between the finish that a skew chisel leaves on the left and a parting tool on the right, especially in wood like this, very dry oak. The parting tool tears the fibers out, whereas the skew chisel will burnish the wood behind the cut. So on this in particular, when you're cutting a thread, you really want to use a skew chisel and get a good finish on there. So now that I'm cutting this down to size, one of the nice things about holding it in the chuck is that I can remove the tailstock like that, get the tool rest out of the way, then I can take my cutting tool and check whether or not it fits. Now it's fitting over the first part, but not the second part, so that's still too tight, that second part. So I'm going to turn that down, and one of the reasons I'm using the tailstock as support is because over this length of wood I'm getting an incredible amount of chatter at the tailstock end, so I'm just putting the tailstock in to give it some support. So that fits, but it only fits the first part. Sorry, it fits the first part, so I know that that's the right diameter. I'll take the rest down to that same diameter. So after checking the diameter, I found that the correct diameter is about there, where I've made the pencil mark. So what I'm going to do now is take down a section of this down to the same diameter. And that should be enough. We'll see in a moment. Oh yeah, that's a nice loose fit now. Now what I found is this is sometimes quite difficult work, getting that to cut in there. So I sometimes use the tool rest as a support for the handle. So I'll just lock that in place. And I need to cut in that direction now, so upwards. But trying to keep this thing straight so that it cuts a nice straight thread. So it's cutting inside there, so you'll find inside there is a cutter and the wood will come out of there. Now what I haven't done yet, and you can see it's started to cut in there, but actually probably tear more than cut. The wood does need to be relatively wet. Now whether that's oil or water or something, it needs to be relatively wet, otherwise the fibers are too dry, they'll separate too easily, which means they tear. So I'm going to apply a little bit of oil on this, but not a lot. What I've got here is Danish oil, not in its original plastic container, because the plastic containers tend to dry up and the plastic caps stick. But I found metal caps on a glass bottle don't stick, so I'm just going to add a little bit of oil there. There's not a lot. I think if you were doing something that was very, very important and you wanted to guarantee that it wouldn't tear out, I would soak this in oil. So put the entire thing in oil, or at least the end that you want to cut the thread on. Put that in oil, and then you'll have better results. Right, so to find the thread again when we're cutting, so if you take it off and you want to put it back on to continue cutting, the best way is to go past where it's cut, turn it the wrong way until you see, I don't know if you might have seen that, I'll just press gently here and you'll see it drop into the thread. There, it dropped into the thread. I'll do that again, a little bit further. So I'm just pressing gently, turning the wrong way, and there, it dropped into the thread. So then I can find where that thread's been cut. There we go, now we're cutting. Now you do need to keep applying forward pressure whilst cutting. It doesn't have something to keep it on track, so you do need to do that. Once it's got some thread, you'll find that it does follow the groove, but until then you need to be applying forward pressure, which is what I'm doing now. Now you can see the shavings that it's taking out. They are breaking out quite a bit. The grain is breaking, and that's because the wood is so dry deep into the wood. When it gets really tough, I prefer to use the lock on my lathe and then just turn it by hand, and then it helps to have the tool rest out of the way. I'll put the lock back on, turn this by hand. Now I've reached the bottom of where I've turned to, so I now have no option but to twist it off backwards. Now we have a thread cut on there. It's not the best thread because the wood wasn't properly oiled beforehand. So the bottom of the thread, you can probably see, is dry. It's much duller or more matte than this part that's been oiled. But to help matters, to help things along, I can now oil that, and it might help a little bit. Certainly helps when turning this thread into the female thread, if this has some oil on it. I'll turn the lathe on very, very slowly and just use, if I turn in reverse, that'll come out over the thread. And that's how I cut the male thread. What I'll do now is take that off, just cut it off, and then cut a hole for the female thread to be cut in. So I've cut that fairly clean, and it's ready to cut the right size hole. One of the handy things in the instructions is the size of starter hole that's needed in the workpiece for the threads. So there's a chart that says for this particular kit, which is a 1 1/4 inch kit, I should use a 1 1/8 drill bit. Now I don't have a 1 1/8 drill bit, but I will turn a hole of 1 1/8 inches. And then it says to lubricate the tap with linseed oil or tung oil, so again oil in the wood so it's a little bit more moist. And then it's important to start the tap as straight as possible. Start slowly. This is important to get a clean cut at the top without tear out. So, and they also say on some types of wood it's helpful to have a bevel on the top edge to help the tap start. So turn the tap in a couple of turns, then turn it back out to allow the chips to clear before you continue. I've measured 1 1/8, which is about 27 millimeters, and I'm going to put that on the end of the wood, and then I'll be able to cut that hole. So the dark circle is 1 1/8. That should possibly be big enough. I'm going to put a slight bevel on there, as suggested to help the cut start. Again, haven't got the right dimension there. It's just the right size. There isn't really any play in there. We have to oil again. Oil this to make sure it doesn't tear too much. We can check that. That's going in a bit better. I can feel that starting to cut. Now, in order to keep that straight, one of the things I've found helpful is to bring this tailstock up, because the tailstock will be in the center. I find this thread a lot more difficult to cut than the other one, than the male thread. So now I'm going to back out a bit. I can feel that starting to cut. I'm going to back out to clear the shavings. I can just see the thread starting to form in there. Now what I do with the other one, where I turn until it drops into the thread, I don't think works so well on this. No, I'm not finding the thread. So it's a bit awkward to hold this thing. It's a very thin piece of wire and the screw sticks out too far for you to be able to push nicely into the center. So it's not ideal. I can see the thread going forwards at least. I'm not quite sure how straight that is, but it's going in. Well, the lock keeps coming off. It's by design, but still. So now that it's locking in, definitely cutting the thread, I'm going to back off a bit and then go back in. This is the one that does a bottomless thread cutter, so I'm going to try this in there and see if we can maybe pick up a thread. Yep, picked it up there, and now cut that in there. So there you go. I've turned off the what would be a nut, effectively. The grain is, the thread anyway, is very, very messy inside there, because this oak is very, very dry.